All right, let's dive in. Bitcoin and human rights. What a combo. Seems like you guys are really curious about how this digital currency is being used as a tool for, like, freedom and empowerment around the world, especially after checking out the Little Bitcoin book. That's what we're exploring today.
Yeah, we're going to be tapping into the knowledge from the Little Bitcoin book, which, by the way, was put together by this global group of experts. They call themselves the Bitcoin Collective. And they have some really eye-opening perspectives on how Bitcoin can change things, especially for people who, struggle with the usual ways of dealing with money.
Totally. That was one of the things that really hit me in the book. Have you ever felt like the whole financial system is kind of rigged? Like, you work hard, try to save, but getting ahead feels like climbing a mountain.
Oh, absolutely. It's a struggle so many people face. And it's actually one of the main problems Bitcoin is trying to solve. In fact, the Little Bitcoin book talks about something called the Cantillon effect. Basically, it means that when governments print more money, the benefits usually go to the people at the top first. And everyone else is left to deal with the consequences, like inflation eating away at their savings.
Yeah, it's like playing a game where the rules keep changing, but only to help someone else. The book actually gave this example of a couple in the Philippines who'd been saving carefully for, decades. And then, boom, their savings lost a huge chunk of their value because the currency went crazy. Imagine working your whole life and then suddenly having everything you saved practically disappear.
It's a harsh reminder of how these traditional systems can fail people. And, we haven't even talked about extreme situations like hyperinflation, which we've seen in places like Venezuela. But even in economies that are stable, think about how much control banks and governments have over your money. They can freeze your accounts, stop your transactions. Makes you wonder if it's really your money if you can't use it freely.
That's true. I never really thought of it that way, but you're right. So how does Bitcoin change the way we think about money? I mean, most people probably don't even stop to think about how money works. We just use it.
Exactly. We kind of take it for granted.
Yeah.
But the Little Bitcoin book does a great job of explaining it all. It boils down to two key things: trust and scarcity. People need to believe that the money they have today will be worth something tomorrow. But when governments can just create more money whenever they want, that trust starts to fade. It's like watering down something valuable.
And that's where Bitcoin steps in with this idea of digital scarcity. There's a limited amount of Bitcoin out there and it can't be messed with, kind of like gold. Nobody can just make more appear out of thin air.
Precisely. And this scarcity is maintained through this process called mining, which is another big idea explained in the book.
Now, we're not talking about, pickaxes and hard hats here.
Not quite, no. Think of it more like a global digital treasure hunt. You've got people all over the world using powerful computers to solve these super complicated math problems. The first one to crack the code gets rewarded with brand new Bitcoins. This whole process, mining, not only keeps the network safe, but also makes sure that no single person or group can control it.
So it's like this decentralized system where everybody plays a part in keeping things honest. But how does this actually help people in the real world, especially when it comes to human rights? That story about the woman who escaped Afghanistan with her life savings in Bitcoin, that really stayed with me.
That story really drives the point home, doesn't it? It's a powerful example of how Bitcoin can be a lifeline for people in really tough situations. Imagine being able to carry all your savings on a tiny device that you can access anywhere in the world. Doesn't matter what country you're in or what the government is doing. That's the kind of freedom Bitcoin can offer.
It's something we take for granted, right? Being able to move our money around freely. We've also seen examples of people using Bitcoin to get away from crazy inflation in Venezuela, avoid censorship in China, and even support humanitarian efforts in places where there's conflict.
Yeah, it really shows how Bitcoin can empower people in ways that were impossible before. And this is just the start. The potential impact of this technology is huge, and it's only going to grow as more people use it. We've talked a lot about the good stuff, the potential of Bitcoin, but the Little Bitcoin book doesn't shy away from the, I guess you could say, the elephant in the room, and that's Bitcoin's crazy price swings.
Yeah, for sure. The volatility, it's a big one. Keeps a lot of people from even trying it out. Feels like a roller coaster sometimes. What do the experts in the book have to say about that?
Well, they actually broke it down into different time frames. So you've got the long view, the medium term, and then those short term jumps up and down.
Makes sense, yeah. It's like checking the weather. The day-to-day forecast can be all over the place, but the overall seasonal trends are a bit more predictable.
Exactly. And when you look at Bitcoin over the long haul, the price has generally gone up. Makes sense when you remember there's only a limited supply.
Right, right. We talked about that before, that there'll only ever be 21 million Bitcoins.
Yeah.
That limited supply, plus more and more people wanting it, has pushed the price up over time. But when you zoom in a bit, things get a lot more interesting, shall we say.
Yeah, the book pointed out a few key things that drive those price swings. One is the cost of mining. Remember those miners we talked about, solving all those crazy math problems? Well, that stuff costs real money. The equipment, the electricity, all of it adds up. And a lot of times, they'll sell some of the Bitcoin they earn just to cover those costs.
Yeah.
And that selling can push the market price down.
It's like a constant back and forth between how much is available and how many people want to buy it. More sellers usually means lower prices. More buyers means higher prices.
Exactly. And then you've got these things called halvings that happen every 4 years. Basically, the reward for mining Bitcoin gets cut in half. So all of a sudden, new Bitcoin is entering the market much slower, making it even more scarce. And often that leads to a big jump in price.
Like a built-in scarcity thing, right? A
Yeah.
controlled release. But let's be real, a lot of those price swings come down to good old-fashioned speculation.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The Little Bitcoin book makes it clear that Bitcoin being traded 24/7 on these online exchanges is really susceptible to that kind of trading where people are just guessing what's going to happen.
People see the price shooting up, and they jump in hoping to make a quick buck. But then even a little bit of bad news or just uncertainty can cause everyone to start selling. It's wild.
And because the Bitcoin market is still pretty small compared to traditional markets, even small trades can have a big impact on the price. The book used this analogy. It's like comparing a speedboat to a giant oil tanker. Any little change can rock the boat.
So we've got mining costs, the halving events, speculation. That's a lot to keep track of.
Mm-hmm.
But the Little Bitcoin book also gets into some of the shadier stuff, like exchange hacks. Those can really freak people out, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. There have been times when exchanges have been hacked and people have lost their Bitcoin. It's a reminder that while the Bitcoin network itself has never been hacked, the platforms where you buy, sell, and store Bitcoin can be vulnerable.
The book really emphasizes how important it is to choose trustworthy exchanges and do what you need to do to protect your Bitcoin, right? Like using one of those hardware wallets to keep your private keys offline.
Absolutely. The bottom line is, if you don't control your private keys, you don't really control your Bitcoin. And while the technology is getting better all the time, it's still a bit of a wild west out there. You got to be smart and careful.
Sounds like you need to be pretty tech savvy to navigate this world safely. The book also talks about some misconceptions about Bitcoin, like, is it really anonymous?
That's a big one that people get wrong. It's actually more like pseudonymous. So all the transactions are recorded on a public ledger, this thing called a blockchain, but they're not directly connected to your real-life identity. But with enough effort, someone could potentially track a transaction back to a person.
Okay, so it's not a perfect tool for, like, illegal stuff, as some people think. And what about the whole environmental impact of all that mining? That's a big concern for a lot of people.
It's a hot topic for sure. Mining does use a lot of energy, but the Little Bitcoin book pointed out something interesting. A big chunk of that energy comes from renewable sources, like hydroelectric power. They also explain that miners are always looking for the cheapest electricity, which often leads them to places where there's extra energy capacity that would otherwise go to waste.
So it's not as simple as saying Bitcoin is bad for the environment. It's more complicated.
For sure. And it's important to weigh those energy costs against the potential benefits. The Little Bitcoin book argues that for people in unstable economies or oppressive regimes, that financial freedom and security offered by Bitcoin can be life-changing.
It's a complex equation with a lot of factors to consider. But this whole discussion shows that Bitcoin isn't just about making money, right? It's about power. Who has it, who controls it, and how it's shared.
Exactly. At its core, Bitcoin challenges the traditional power structures in finance. It's a decentralized system that puts individuals in control. But what does that look like in the real world?
Okay, let's switch gears a bit and talk about how people actually use Bitcoin. Let's say someone is listening to this and they're intrigued, but they have no idea where to start. What would you tell them?
Well, the Little Bitcoin book actually has this really helpful guide on how to get and use Bitcoin. You can do it through mining, buying it on an exchange, or even earning it.
Mining sounds pretty intimidating for the average person.
Yeah, you're probably right. The book even says that mining has become really specialized and requires a lot of resources. For most people, the easiest way to get started is by buying Bitcoin on an exchange.
And there are different types of exchanges, right? Like some let you trade Bitcoin for other cryptocurrencies.
Yep. You've got fiat to crypto exchanges where you can trade traditional money, like dollars, for Bitcoin. And then there are crypto to crypto exchanges where you can trade different cryptocurrencies with each other.
What about those peer-to-peer exchanges where you meet up with someone in person to trade? Those sound interesting, but maybe a bit risky. No.
Those are an option, especially for folks who are really into privacy. But the Little Bitcoin book really stresses the importance of doing your homework and choosing a platform that you can trust, no matter how you decide to get Bitcoin.
Got it. Safety first. It's key to be aware of the risks. And once you actually have some Bitcoin, you need a wallet to store it in, right?
That's right. A Bitcoin wallet is like a digital bank account, kind of. It's where you keep your Bitcoin and manage your transactions. The Little Bitcoin book gives a pretty good rundown of different types of wallets. You've got hardware wallets, which are supposed to be the most secure because they store your Bitcoin offline. Then there are desktop and mobile wallets if you need convenience, and online wallets for easy access.
Wow, so many choices. It's starting to make more sense now, less like a foreign language and more like something I could actually use. But even with all this info, it still feels like we're just scratching the surface. The book even admits that we're still in the early days of Bitcoin, and it's tough to know for sure what the future holds, right?
And that's what makes it so exciting. The Little Bitcoin book lays out a possible path for Bitcoin. It could start by becoming something everyone accepts as a store of value, like digital gold, basically. Then, as more businesses and people start using it for everyday payments, it could become a common way to pay for things.
And eventually it could even become the main unit of count, meaning prices would be listed in Bitcoin instead of dollars or euros. That's a pretty wild idea.
Yeah, it is. And while that future isn't certain, the possibilities are incredible. But the Little Bitcoin book doesn't just paint a rosy picture. It presents two very different scenarios. A dystopian future where governments and corporations have even more control, or a more utopian vision where Bitcoin gives power to individuals and sparks a ton of innovation.
So which path will we end up taking? That's something we all need to think about.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Bitcoin and human rights. So we've covered a lot of ground, right? How Bitcoin challenges the traditional financial world, the tech behind it, the volatility that makes it both exciting and a little scary, and even how someone could actually get started using it. But now, the Little Bitcoin book takes us on a trip to the future, 2039 to be exact.
Yeah, and they don't hold back. They paint these two really contrasting pictures of what the world could look like. One's pretty grim, and the other, well, it could be pretty amazing.
Okay, let's start with the grim one. What does that world look like?
Think about, global conflicts getting worse, corporations having more power than ever, and governments tightening their control over everything we do. In this scenario, the Little Bitcoin book argues that whoever controls the money basically controls everything. It's like that whole Big Brother is watching you thing, but with money, right? Kind of scary if you think about it. But the book doesn't just leave us with that depressing thought, does it? There's another, more hopeful vision, too.
Yeah, thankfully. They also talk about a future where Bitcoin actually helps create a world that's more decentralized, more fair, and way more innovative. They call it the borderless economy.
Okay, now you've got my attention. What exactly does a borderless economy mean?
Imagine a world where you can send money to anyone, anywhere, without needing permission from a bank or government. No borders, no restrictions. It's a world where anyone can become an entrepreneur because they have access to this global marketplace.
So Bitcoin basically becomes the currency of the world, connecting everyone in ways we can't even imagine right now.
Exactly. And because Bitcoin is scarce and can't be manipulated by governments, it could really help even things out. The Little Bitcoin book suggests that this could even lead to a decline in authoritarianism, since people would have more control over their own finances.
That sounds pretty ideal. But are there any potential downsides to this? I mean, it's such a huge change from the world we live in now.
Yeah, the book does point out some potential bumps in the road. For example, such a dramatic shift could disrupt the current power structures and maybe even lead to instability. There's bound to be pushback from those who benefit from the way things are now.
Yeah, people in power don't usually give up control easily, so it's not just about the technology itself, it's about changing how we think about money, power, and freedom.
Exactly. But the Little Bitcoin book actually lays out a pretty convincing plan for how Bitcoin could slowly but surely become the world's main currency.
Well, what's that plan look like?
They break it down into 3 stages. First, Bitcoin needs to become widely accepted as a store of value, like digital gold. Then, as more people and businesses start using it for everyday transactions, it'll naturally evolve into a common payment method.
And finally, It reaches a point where it's the main way we measure value, meaning prices would be in Bitcoin instead of dollars or euros. That's wild. It makes you wonder what would happen to central banks, how governments would collect taxes, if we'd even need dollars or euros anymore.
Right. It's like trying to imagine what life was like before the internet. It's such a massive change.
The Little Bitcoin book also talks a lot about privacy in this future world. With everything becoming digital, are we giving up too much control over our financial information?
They make a strong argument that privacy will be even more important in a cashless society. We'll need tools to protect our financial data from both corporations and governments.
Makes you think about that story of the woman escaping Afghanistan with her Bitcoin. Could she have done that if all her transactions were easily tracked?
Probably not. That's why privacy is so essential to Bitcoin. And the Little Bitcoin book highlights how technologies like the Lightning Network are already making Bitcoin transactions even more private and efficient.
For me, the big takeaway is that Bitcoin is much more than just a way to make money or some abstract idea. It has the potential to give people more power, challenge the way things are, and change the world as we know it. It all comes down to how we decide to use this technology.
Yeah, the vision laid out by the Bitcoin Collective might sound like a dream to some, but they present some pretty convincing arguments. And even if we don't end up in their ideal future, the journey itself is going to be pretty interesting to witness.
So, what do you think? Ready to explore the world of Bitcoin? It's a world full of possibilities, challenges, and maybe even some hope. We've got some more resources from the Little Bitcoin book in the show notes, so be sure to check those out if you want to learn more. And that's a wrap on our deep dive into Bitcoin and human rights. Until next time, keep asking questions and stay curious.